with occasional visits from what I call Uncle Franklin. And I remember at our dining room table, he would be talking about his days as a young lieutenant in the Army working at Nuremberg. So that was just a little fleeting memory of him talking about Nuremberg. And then I'm learning the rules of engagement, which, as I said, incorporate the Nuremberg principles into the rules of war. So while I'm in Vietnam, my main job is to protect fighter bombers from being attacked so they can carry out their bombing missions. Mm-hmm. And my unit had heavy machine guns and mortars and counter radar systems, so we were detecting mortars coming in. We were attacked. The base had been attacked, the most attacked base in Vietnam, so it was, it was like my adrenaline is running all the time. Mm-hmm. But I was asked to do an extra duty, which was to go and investigate the after effects of bombing missions to make sure the pilots were hitting their targets. And I did not know or think about what a target was. I was just, okay, a target, just. And in 1 week, I went to 5 targets, and they were all inhabited fishing villages. Mm. Somewhere between, in that week, I saw somewhere between 700 and 900 murdered Vietnamese civilians, more than half of whom were children. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. I quickly discovered this was policy. It was intentional. We needed body counts. And I knew at that point that the rules of war were just rhetorical. Mm-hmm. They were written down, but once you're in war, it means nothing. So I got really interested over the years in studying whether there was such a thing as rules of war, going back to studying the Nuremberg principles, the war crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes against peace, and I said, we committed the ultimate crime against peace by invading Vietnam, mm-hmm. and in order to maintain the war, every day we had to commit war crimes and crimes against humanity. Mm-hmm. We had 44 torture centers in Vietnam. Every province had a torture center. There was one 7 miles from my base. And then I finished law school in 1972, and I already had a master's degree in criminology, and I discovered when I had my first case, I just couldn't get myself to rise when the bailiff said, "Everybody rise." Obeying authority was not a good idea for me. Mm-hmm. So over the years, I have been fascinated with the fact that Robert Jackson came from my home area in Chautauqua County, that he had been such a prominent lawyer, a Democratic lawyer from a Republican area, had been Attorney General. He dissented in the Japanese internment camp case, which was very impressive to me. And I started accumulating materials about Nuremberg. I have files and files at home about Nuremberg and Jackson. I knew also that the International Military Tribunal that was signed the agreement was signed at least on August 8th, which, by the way, was 2 days after we bombed Hiroshima and 1 day before we bombed Nagasaki, and I thought that was ironic. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem to apply to bombing. In fact, the tribunal agreed it wouldn't cover bombing crimes. And then I realized, as I studied U.S. history and studied military history extensively after Vietnam, that we have always violated, even since the Nuremberg principles were adopted, officially, I guess, in 1950 by the United Nations. We pay no attention to them whatsoever. They're for somebody else. So it's victor's justice. Mm-hmm. And so after witnessing lots of murders and maimings by U.S. money and U.S. weapons in Nicaragua and El Salvador, I decided with some other people that we would go to the source of the weapons, which was Concord, California Naval Weapons Station, the largest Pentagon arsenal on the West Coast, from which the weapons were going to Nicaragua and El Salvador. It was also the source of the weapons that went to Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And there had always been a lot of protests at that base. And I said, I think the appropriate name for our obstruction activities is the Nuremberg Actions. And so we formed Nuremberg Actions on June 10th, 1987. We started an occupation at the tracks, and our job was to obstruct the further participation of illegal activity leading to the illegal and criminal murder of civilians in Central America. And our job was to defy the law, was to disobey the law that says you can't obstruct munitions trains. There's a big sign, year in prison, $5,000 fine. Of course, we knew that we were likely to go to jail, but we said we're Nuremberg Actions, and our obligation as U.S. citizens is to uphold Nuremberg, which we would have said after World War II. We would have hoped the Germans would have applied the Nuremberg principles to themselves. Of course, it was victor's justice. So we that became a name that I think that Nuremberg Actions encampment occupation lasted for almost 15 years.
Okay.
And after I was struck by the train on September 1st, '87 in another criminal act where the train accelerated to more than 3 times the speed limit, which was 5 miles an hour, and was accelerating 17 miles an hour, according to the FBI, the train crew had been ordered that day not to stop for us. We found that out, of course, later.
In the case. Yeah.
And why? Because they were fearing that the 3 of us veterans who were on the tracks that day were going to hijack the train, which of course was absurd. The train is only on 3 miles of track. 350 armed Marines protect the train. Speed limit 5 miles an hour. 2 spotters in the front of the locomotive, whose job it is to make sure the tracks are always clear of anything, because the train carries only highly explosive munitions. And then after 18 days in the hospital, recovering from 19 major injuries, well, you know,
do you have much recall of that?
I have no recall of being hit.
Other than looking at some horrific pictures.
Yeah, I have no memory for 4 days. They call it retrograde amnesia. I have a huge skull fracture.
Yeah.
You know, I have a piece of my skull the size of a lemon that was completely dislodged and driven into my right frontal lobe, destroyed the lobe. That's why people thought I was going to die. Because I was not privy to any of this for 4 days. And so I woke up on the 4th day, which was Saturday, September 5th. 9,000 people showed up at the tracks, ripped up 300 feet of the tracks, and raided.
And it's just the base actually had to go through municipal property, so it was public property.
We were on a public right-of-way. A highway bisected the base.
That's right.
One side of the base was the bunkers, the other side of the base was the port, where the ships took the munitions off the trucks and the train. So we were vigiling on a public right-of-way. And 9,000 people showed up, ripped up 300 feet of the tracks. The police just had to watch. Jesse Jackson was there. Joan Baez was there. Other singers were there. And from that day on for 28 consecutive months, 24 hours a day, day and night, there was a permanent encampment, often of as many as 200 and 300 people at that site. They blocked every train and every truck in that period of time. Of course, they would get through, but not before large numbers of arrests took place. 2,100, I think it was 2,000 or 2,100 arrests in that period of time. 3 people's arms were broken by the police. And this was Nuremberg Actions. This was upholding the Nuremberg principles. You cannot move those weapons, those munitions that are going to kill people, without moving me first. That was the motto. And people say, did you regret doing it? I said, never regret it. Regret losing my legs, yes, but not regret that I was there.